Tonight, we're taking a deep dive into a story that began in a small, often overlooked corner of the world, but is now sending shockwaves across the entire globe. What started as a localized border dispute is rapidly spiraling into a full-blown international crisis, pulling in major world powers and threatening the delicate balance of global stability. How did we get here? And more importantly, what comes next? It all began just a few months ago, a simmering, decades-old disagreement over a resource-rich valley between two neighboring countries. For years, this was a story that barely made international headlines. There were periodic skirmishes, diplomatic protests, and failed mediations, but for the most part, the world looked away. The local population lived in a state of uneasy truce, their lives punctuated by the constant threat of renewed hostilities. The first sign of a major escalation came with a sudden, coordinated military offensive. It was larger and more sophisticated than anything seen in the region for over 30 years. Tanks rolled across disputed territories, and air support targeted strategic infrastructure. Initially, the international community responded with familiar calls for de-escalation and restraint. Diplomatic channels buzzed with activity, and the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, but these early efforts were met with defiance. The conflict took a dramatic turn when a third, neighboring nation, citing historical alliances and security concerns, declared its support for one of the aggressors. This wasn't just a verbal declaration. They began supplying advanced weaponry, intelligence, and logistical support. This intervention fundamentally changed the calculus of the conflict. It was no longer a simple bilateral dispute. It was now a proxy war, a chessboard for larger geopolitical ambitions. This is where the global powers started getting directly involved. The world's leading economic and military nations have long-standing, complex relationships with all the countries in this region. One major power, which has significant trade partnerships and a mutual defense treaty with the nation that was initially attacked, responded by deploying a naval carrier group to the nearby sea. They framed it as a measure to ensure freedom of navigation and to deter further aggression. This move was immediately condemned by a rival global power, who accused them of inflammatory posturing and interference. In a tit-for-tat response, they announced joint military exercises with the aggressor nation and its new ally. Suddenly, the world's two most powerful militaries were operating in dangerously close proximity, backing opposing sides in an escalating war. The language from their leaders became sharper, more accusatory. Diplomatic niceties were replaced with thinly veiled threats. The economic consequences began to ripple outwards almost immediately. The conflict zone sits astride a critical artery for global trade, particularly for energy supplies. Shipping lanes became hazardous, and insurance premiums for cargo vessels skyrocketed. Major shipping companies began rerouting their fleets, adding weeks and billions of dollars to global supply chains. The price of oil and natural gas surged, not just because of the shipping disruptions, but because of fears that the conflict could spill over into major energy-producing areas. This energy shock hit a global economy already struggling with inflation. Families everywhere began feeling the pinch at the gas pump and in their utility bills. Stock markets from New York to Tokyo tumbled as investors grew fearful of a prolonged period of instability and a potential global recession. Beyond the markets, the humanitarian crisis has been devastating. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been displaced from their homes, fleeing the violence with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Refugee camps have sprung up along the borders of neighboring countries, which are themselves struggling to cope with the massive influx of people. We've seen heartbreaking images of families torn apart, of cities reduced to rubble. International aid organizations are on the ground, but they are overwhelmed and under-resourced, struggling to provide basic necessities like food, water, and medical care. They warn of a looming catastrophe as winter approaches. The digital front of this war is just as fierce. A wave of cyber attacks has targeted critical infrastructure on all sides. Power grids, financial systems, and government websites have been disrupted. An unprecedented flood of disinformation and propaganda is being pumped onto social media, designed to sow confusion, incite hatred, and manipulate public opinion both at home and abroad. It's become incredibly difficult for ordinary people, and even for journalists, to distinguish fact from fiction. Each side paints the other as a villain, creating a narrative that justifies their actions and galvanizes their population, making a peaceful resolution even harder to achieve. Diplomatic efforts are now in overdrive, but they are facing immense challenges. The United Nations seems paralyzed, with key Security Council members using their veto power to block any meaningful resolution, each protecting their respective allies. Peace talks have been proposed, but the warring parties are so far apart, and their international backers so entrenched, that a breakthrough seems unlikely. The preconditions for even sitting down at the same table are, for now, insurmountable. Each side believes it can achieve its objectives militarily and is unwilling to make concessions. So, where do we go from here? The situation is incredibly volatile, and there are several potential paths forward, many of them bleak. In the worst-case scenario, a direct military miscalculation or confrontation between the major powers could occur. A ship or an aircraft from one side getting too close to the other, a stray missile, an accidental engagement, any of these could trigger a rapid and uncontrollable escalation. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps military planners and diplomats awake at night, a regional conflict sparking a direct war between nuclear-armed states. A more likely, but still grim, scenario is a long, grinding war of attrition. The conflict becomes a frozen, but still deadly, stalemate, much like other proxy wars we've seen throughout history. It would drain resources, destabilize the entire region for a generation, and create a permanent humanitarian disaster. The global economy would continue to suffer under the weight of sanctions, trade disruptions, and high energy prices. The most hopeful scenario, though it seems distant right now, is a diplomatic breakthrough. This would require immense pressure from the international community, including from countries that have so far remained on the sidelines. It would also require a change in calculation from the primary combatants and their backers, a realization that the cost of continuing the war is far greater than any potential benefit. A neutral third party might be able to mediate a ceasefire, followed by painstaking negotiations to address the root causes of the conflict. This would involve compromises that no side is currently willing to consider. What started as a distant news report has now become a defining crisis of our time. It's a stark reminder of how interconnected our world is, how a spark in one region can ignite a fire that threatens to consume us all. The decisions made in the coming days and weeks by leaders in capitals around the world will have consequences for decades to come. This is a story that is still unfolding, and we will continue to follow it every step of the way. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis helpful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more in-depth reports on the stories shaping our world. Stay informed and stay safe. There's another layer to this story that Washington is now pushing hard. U.S. officials are claiming that Iran had ordered an assassination plot against former President Donald Trump. They further claim the Iranian official who ordered that plot has now been killed in these strikes. As of now, no independent evidence has been provided to support this claim, but in wartime, narratives matter. This claim is designed to justify escalation to the American public. Let's now zoom in on what Israel is doing inside Iran. Because the scope of these operations is extraordinary, Israeli jets have flown more than 700 combat sorties. That is a relentless, round-the-clock bombing campaign. They claim to have destroyed over 150 ballistic missiles and more than 200 Iranian air defense systems. Think about that. Air defense systems are what protect a country from airstrikes. With those gone, Iran's skies are increasingly open. Israel has identified two target categories. First, regime power centers, security buildings, military command headquarters, intelligence facilities. Second, military infrastructure, missile launch sites, weapons depots, radar systems. New strikes have now reached Isfahan, the city home to Iran's most sensitive nuclear facilities. The holy city of Qom has been struck. The capital Tehran has been hit repeatedly. Cities like Natanz, Shiraz fall under bombardment. More than 2,000 targets across more than a dozen Iranian cities. This is not a surgical strike. This is systematic destruction. Let's look at the strategic geography of TH.